Fede Alvarez. Absolutely. Thank you. We were just talking outside. I'm a huge fan of your films, previous films, and the fact that young people are fighting the establishment. It's a recurring thing in your films. And this is the first time in the Alien universe that we have young people involved. Can you tell us about that aspect?
I think it's always. I don't try to over. I do sometimes, but I try not to overthink too much. You know, where a story comes from or why you decide to write a certain story a certain way. I mean, I look back. I'm from Uruguay. I was born there. I always wanted to make films. There's no way. There was no film industry or anything. I lived there till not too long ago, 10 years ago. And so my reality of growing up was a little bit of that. You know, that's a dramatization or exaggeration of what was growing up in Uruguay. I wanted to dreaming about going somewhere else and do something you cannot do here. Over there, those kids can only be a farmer or a miner, and they just want to break free. That's why we lean in ideas early on. You know, they say, you know, did you really? I just don't want to end up like our parents. They say at some point. That's really what Rodo and I, my co-writer, we always tap into when we write young characters. What's the anxiety of those kids? What do they want to do? Which might be different if you grew up in the 80s in Reagan America. Probably that's not just sentiment. You know, that's sounded like a fucking great place, at least in the movies. Sound like things are going great economy, boom, great. Like that's not the sentiment of a young kid to get the fuck out of here. I mean, but if you're in a small town, maybe you did want to go to New York, right? Like get out of. So you try to find something universal, I guess.
You know, I mentioned to you that I'm from Panama, and I did grow up in a third world country, and I couldn't. I kept thinking about the Jackson Star colony aspect as a third world. Yeah. Is that something that you were?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's usually when you see a colony in the future, in other movies, tend to be portrayed as like kind of high tech, futuristic, hope. The beacon of colonization, and for me, I feel it's going to look more like that, probably. Like someone create a project, send a bunch of people. Who's going to go there? Well, people that have nothing better. That's the only hope they're going to end up there. And then if the project doesn't work and the mines go dry, how are you going to get them out of there? And that's a reality of a lot of what I grew up. Uruguay and all these countries were created at some point for a purpose, for an industry, and that industry for some reason failed at some point in the 1950s, and then everybody's left there. But it's not different than Detroit, right? Like that's the reality of a lot of places. So it was kind of inspired by that. But it's inspired by that. But I remember doing press with China, with the movie did even better than the United States, and they asked me, did you make a base in China? Were you thinking about China? Because everybody in China thought this was an analogy of growing up in China, I want to get out of there or something. So and I tell them, of course, yes, I did. but you paint your village and you paint the world, I guess.
When I introduced the film, I mentioned that you shot the film chronologically in a linear fashion, which is it's not normal in the industry. Why was it essential for you to shoot the film in chronological order?
More and more for me, I don't want movies to be the process of making a movie to be a means to an end. Which is normally that's what they teach you, and that's how it's done. You go through a process to get the pieces to eventually, through the footage you shot, plus the stuff you do in post-production, through the CG that people are going to add later, eventually there will be a story that makes sense. But on the day, it might not, right? It might just be, we shoot the ending and now the beginning and now this thing. So everybody involved, they can be, kind of uninspiring, right? But when you go linear like we do, there's many benefits of it. First of all, it has to make sense. We managed to make sense enough, to convince everybody to do it that way. But for the actors, it's great, mostly because actors find their character usually as they go. They don't find out day one. So you can see, hopefully, their change, how they mature, how they get more comfortable with being on set. So there's a lot of the arcs that they end up, it translates into their performances, I think. But for me, it make it more what it should be, what I always was when I was a kid making films. it should be a game. You go through the adventure. Never as a kid you go, okay, go do a Western. So first, be on the floor dead. It's the end first. And then let's go to the beginning. We're going to shoot this part. No, you go, okay, you just walk into the bar. You have a gun. Go talk with that guy. That's what you do. So naturally, the exciting way to do it is in order, right? It's just go through the adventure together. And the crew feels like they're going through it. And by the time you walk into a new set, everybody's like, oh, wow, we made it to this space station. Now we're here. And people are truly excited. And it translates. I mean, we made this movie for about 80 million and something. So which the only way to make a movie that looks this bigger,
peanuts,
for this size, is because people really want to be there. They want to make it. There's a group of people we all like in it, like we try to make the best we can with what we have. And if you don't do those things, I think people might, just if it's just another day at the office, you don't get that.
I also mentioned to the audience that, like, you minimize the special effects, that actually what we're seeing, it was actually you built the sets and the effects are real. Tell us about the impact of that and what it meant for you and the actors to shoot.
I think it goes back to the same thing I was just saying. I guess when you want to play, you want to imagine, you go through this adventure. No one imagines, I guess, stand in front of this blue screen, and there's not going to be anything there. But one day there will be. We're never going to see it. We'll see it in the movie. Like, you want to be in that place. But it was also a generational thing. I grew up watching behind the scenes of this movie, like Alien and Aliens, and seeing incredible sets, animatronics. Everything was quite real, because there was no alternative at the time. So that was my idea of making movies. So one day when it was my turn to actually make a movie, that's what you want to do. Which is, we'll see what happens when there's, kids that grew up watching how they made movies the last 10 years. Their idea of a set is a blue screen and some minimal build, and and you don't really see anything quite exciting a lot of times. So they don't. But for me, it was always exciting to see behind the scenes. So a lot of people that work in this movie work in the original Aliens. That was my first thing I did. I just went back to the same team and tried to get everybody that was still working to get them involved in it and teach me how they used to make these movies, right? So we build animatronics for everything. We build the sets. We build. No one does ceilings these days because I don't know why. It seems like people think you don't see them much. So why would you build it? And if you do, they put it in CG. But we build everything, our ships. We had 2 blue screens in the whole movie, everything else. And even on those blue screens, we didn't CG it. We did matte paintings, like, artists will paint the hallway and it will just compose into the shot to look like it was a deeper hallway. So it was really, it was a dream for me to really indulge in those old techniques that I grew up watching and learning, that by the time I was able to make movies, everybody was like, we don't do it that way anymore. Now it's all CG. And I was like, oh, damn it, I waited all my life to do this thing.
Is this way of doing things harder or easier?
It's harder, but it's harder on the day. Because on the day of the shoot, everybody wants to move on, usually. You want to get the shot, move on, they just move to the next page. So anything that can be kicked for later, the logic tends to be, well, let's just leave it for VFX. And so when there's a creature or something like that, if the creature comes through the door, to shoot an empty door, way easier than bring the 2 tons animatronic through the door that's going to fail. They're going to have to do a bunch of shots. And usually, it's really hard to make them look great. You have to really massage those shots and the light and everything to get a real life out of these machines, as incredible as they are. So definitely harder. But I think, I don't think cinema is about making it easier. Lately I'm obsessed with David Lean, and you watch those movies, you go, fucking hell, there's nothing easy about making those movies that they used to make. It's actually completely opposite, and I think that's why they are the spectacle they are. I think you have to put yourself through the most difficult path, to be able to get something on the screen that at least you don't see every day, right?
You talked about the ceiling throughout this. Once we're inside the ships, there's an incredible sense of claustrophobia, and it's not just on the set, the camera work. Can you tell us about building that sense, the Steadicam, walk us through creating that sense of claustrophobia that we feel in the film.
A lot of it is credit to Ridley, right? Like that first movie did that so well, and even Cameron on part 2, and at some degree, Fincher on part 3. But I think it's something I love to do. I've done it in Don't Breathe in my other movies. It's like a corridor, a camera, a couple of characters, a thread. I think you can do so much with that. If done well, you can milk that so much and get so much suspense out of it. I think because scale is completely relative. We learned that on Don't Breathe, on my second film, that we had a small house in Detroit. That's all we had, but the story felt bigger, I think, because it's all about the right point of view, right? If you put the camera in the right place with the right lens, that corridor, I feel massive and have so much weight. So, but I'm old school that way as well. I think if ideally the perfect movie should have no dialogue at all. Don't Breathe, actually, my second film was a 60-page script. It has almost no lines. This was not that, but we were really trying to make it as purist as possible, meaning the camera should tell the story as much as possible. I think for tension and suspense, that's always better. There's a lot of moments in the film where we actually suck out all the sound, and there's no even an ambience track. There's no hum. It's just like dry silence, and it's just things like that really create a level of tension that used to be more normal. There's bad habits, I think, of cinema the last 10, 20 years in sound and things that just didn't make it better. And so a lot of those were old tricks of those movies a few years ago that you didn't have a constant they didn't have that. They were just like dead silent, and that, I think, makes it so much suspenseful.
I mentioned to the audience when I introduced the film that all the sets were built, and why was it necessary that everything in the spaceship, all the buttons, were functional? And I mean, it was like what we see is what you got, is what you get. It's like everything was built.
But isn't that the point? Like that's, I guess, what you want to. I guess, I don't know. I think when it comes to create a universe and special effects and all that, actually the best way to put it is what Ridley said to me early on talking about this movie. He was telling me about how he never cared about science fiction until he walked into a theater as a young man and saw 2001. And I asked him, what was, I know the movie, and it's a great movie, but I was like, what was so special about that movie specifically? You had to boil it down to a concept. And he said, well, Stanley fooled me. He thought at that point he knew enough about cinematic techniques and special effects to see the strings of things. You'd see how they did things. And back then, he said, I saw that and it fooled me. And that's a lot of it. That's a lot of what makes a movie very special. And any of the stories, you want to fool the audience into believe that that's a real place. And we are super smart as an audience these days. You can see when that door doesn't really work. That's not actually real. Or that panel, or that computer, or that set is not real, or that ship is not real. Like you can see it. And it seems like even movies have gave up at a certain point, particularly with special effects, with CGI. When it's overdone, it's going for the spectacle. But at no point expect you to believe that that's real, because most people can see, wow, that's not. That's computer graphics. It's not. Still, it might be visually incredible, but it's not real. And I think for this genre with tension, and even 2001 at the same time can get really tense and suspenseful, and you gotta believe that place is real. So anything, every department can do to try to fool you that the world you see, that this is a window to another dimension where all those things are actually happening, right? That's, as a kid, that's how you watch a movie. You don't think they're actors. That's why you watch movies like, oh my God, which is what I hope people can watch movies, that we could all watch movies that way, like with wide eyes and concern about every character and covering your eyes, and oh my God, because you're so convinced that what's on the other side is real. That's my ambition, at least, right? Mm-hmm. It's really, particularly when you have this sort of scripts, it's hard because there's so many things that are happening. How are we going to make all the things, how am I going to fool you into believe all this is real? But the approach of building everything, having real animatronics, is because they are real, they're there. And they're quite dangerous. Those animatronics, so you flip the wrong switch, they'll take the head off of an actor. They're like pretty crazy. So when you bring close to the actors, a lot of the tension, it's quite real. They're nervous. Everybody would be. When those face huggers jump, the jumpers, they're like real big thing that we throw at people's faces, and they're like a big lump of rubber. You don't want to hit by that. So in that respect, it's easier to fool the audience, right? Because most of the things are real.
Indulge the super geeky man that grew up watching alien movies. You have Romulus and Remus, and in the spaceship, the Romulus and the Remus, they look like Alien and Aliens. The two films. Am I far off?
No, that was the intention. It actually has years on it. So the Remus model is older, and Romulus was added later. So we could get closer to the eras, because those movies are supposed to happen a few decades apart. So we thought, well, that's a good way for me to indulge in the two styles of those two movies. From the get-go, the whole exercise was, we're going to take Alien, we're going to take Aliens, put them on top of each other, look through it, and see what we see. And that was the concept of the movie, in a way. That was the guiding principle for me and most people involved in the art department, the cinematographer. Was, what if you take those movies? Because as an Alien fan, if you're going to follow one of them as a style, to have to choose between those two is a perverse choice. If you're a true fan, it's impossible to choose. Those two are incredible. So we said, well, might as well take both of them, combine them, and we hope we were right, that the result was going to be something new, something that reminds you of them in a certain degree, but it's different. But that's correct. Like when they come out into the new model, things are a bit more modern. The light, even some of the lenses we use, which is transitioning more into the style of Aliens.
And how you retrofitted everything to look like we're watching an 80s film. Can you walk us through that dynamic of us? I mean, it's very dynamic for us and exciting for us to be watching something that is retrofitted to the 80s. I mean, I cannot articulate it, but it's like super cool to be watching a current film that is actually recreating the 80s feel.
Well, that was the idea, and we went to crazy extents for that. From not only the visual style but the sound. We make sure that the sound, the voices mostly sound like they were recorded on tape, or we'll put them through tape emulators to make sure it had that different quality that they used to have. Like people scream in this movie, the scream clips like it used to on tape. It just saturates. Tape is not digital, so it would saturate. It will never do what digital does. And digital has infinite range. So when you hear a scream today, you hear it perfectly to every detail. And it's not as scary as when you hear the scream that used to be, which is more like you have the scream and you have like, it was terrifying for me as a kid because it was a tape that couldn't take it anymore. So we did that here with the sound. We did it with every degree to trying to capture that. But I remember at the studio at some point, asking a question that the hidden question was like, are you out of your mind? Why are you doing this? And my answer was, I don't think, Psycho is in black and white, not because color didn't exist. It was because at the time, Hitchcock thought it's more fitting for the story that he was trying to tell to make it black and white, and there was color available. There was better technology. Thought that was you had to go back a bit to make it work better. And Coppola's Dracula is one of my favorite horror movies, and at the time he was trying to make in '93. A movie with all the old school techniques of the monster movies he loved, from the 40s, which in a way is not the distance from now to the 80s. It's not that different.
Right,
it's kind of the same difference that he had from the 90s to those times.
Pulp Fiction and Quentin Tarantino.
Exactly. He's Pulp Fiction. He's trying to do his exploitation movies that he grew up watching and loving, and so I think that's why. I mean, that's why the studio is releasing this movie in VHS. I made them agree to that, and they did. Why does it look better? I do.
Okay.
I have a VCR at home, and I love because I fell in love with these movies watching them on VHS when I was a kid. So I was like, oh man, if I could have this movie on VHS and push it in and watch it 4:3, we'll do it. And the studio agreed to do it, and it's the first big studio movie released on VHS since 2006, A History of Violence, if you're wondering. That was the last one ever. So, does it look better? It doesn't have to go forward all the time to be exciting. For me, it's exciting. For a lot of people, the fact that they're going to be able to watch it on VHS, it's exciting.
Based on what you're telling us about foregoing CGI as much as possible, how did you tell us about the zero gravity sequence, which is breathtaking? I noticed that your camera evades the horizon completely.
Well, it was one of the biggest challenges because that hadn't been done before in any of these movies. So, it's like, how are we going to do that? We knew we were going to do some CG, just removal or like the acid blood and the acid blood sequence. But what you actually mentioned was the big finding that we realized, you're trying to hide this gravity, right? You don't want the audience to see the gravity, and usually you see it because you see it. You see the weight of a body pulling, be pulled in this certain direction. So the key was to make sure we never revealed the horizon too much. If there's no gravity, there's no up and down. So if there's no up and down, the rule of thumb is as soon as the gravity's gone, the camera starts spinning because there's no up and down. So there's no point of being straight looking at the horizon, and that was going to reveal the gravity. And then also
you
the
watch
sets.
the movie again, the camera, you never see the horizon line. It's like there's no line across where you normally see in film.
It's to avoid you seeing the gravity. And then we also, in a lot of the sequences, we had two sets, like the normal set, and then the same set looking up. We build a reduced version of the set, but just looking up. So
you had a horizontal set and a vertical set.
So, and usually it's one shot is one set, the next shot is the other set, back to one set, back to another. So what that does to your brain is like when you think you saw the gravity pulling the actors down, then you see a close-up, and they're kind of floating up because they're dangling, really. They're just dangling, in a wire. They're climbing up. So and their hair is pulled back because the gravity is pulling it back, but you think it's just floating, Those are the things. I remember we had, early on, there was like $2 million in the budget just for CG hair because that was by default by the studio. We have to put CG hair because otherwise there's no way to do it. How are you going to hide it? And I was like, that's the thing. We'll figure out a way. We took that out. We created that. Also, there was always wind. Wind tunnel saved us. It was easier to get two wind machines that paid $2 million for CG hair. So we did that, and there's a lot of that's why the hair is always like twirling up and down to hide the gravity. That was a whole trick. Even the whole elevator sequence at the end, that big chunk, that elevator was actually a corridor, which is looking up. You could walk on the floor, and the actors were on wires, but they were like, spinning, which is throwing them down the corridor and back. And so same thing. And we did have one that was normal, but it was a shorter one. And again, it's usually one shot from one, then back to the other. So ideally, hopefully, you guys were, fooled enough at some point that you go, what's going on there? What's happening?
So the elevator shaft that we see, that was actually, you built it all out?
Yeah. We extended it. I'm sure we extend some floors towards the end, but it was like a 5 or 6 stories, like super long corridor to be able to do long shots and chase the actors, down that corridor.
Mm-hmm. The character of Andy is a phenomenal character because we never know. Our perception of him shifts throughout the film. We think we know him, and then we think we don't know where he's at, and then it keeps shifting. Can you tell us about drafting that character?
It was kind of the early findings on the story, this idea that there was going to be a synthetic in the group that for the first time, at least at the beginning, wasn't about being the smartest guy in the group. It was just a damaged, obsolete synthetic, and that was going to subvert some of the expectations. And then when he becomes, when he has this change in the middle of the movie, it was always going to be the game playing with the audience prejudice that, okay, he's going to be evil now. One of the main things is that it made him turn into a British accent. So people go, oh, he's going to be a bad guy now. But he, in that moment, but if you really scrutinize what he does, I will defend him that he never done anything bad in the movie. even when he lets that girl die, he's honest. He goes like, you can catch what he's saying, but he's saying it takes 2 seconds for that door to open, another 2 seconds to take command, and another 2 to close. That's plenty of time for the creature to get in here. He will be probably right. They will be all dead, and he just makes a decision that no one can make. But it's horrific, right? Because it's inhuman, and that's the problem. But at the end of the day, he never really truly betrays them. At least not in the way they were going to betray him, which is way worse in a way for me, at least. And so that was kind of the pleasure of writing that character, to make sure he was never evil. He was never doing something bad. You know, when he closed the door and he says, "You almost closed the door on him." He was like, "Yeah, but did not." He did perfect timing, and that was the pleasure of that character, to play with your prejudice, to have you waiting for him to do this transgression against them, to betray them, to hurt them. But he never really does. At least that's how I feel about it.
And speaking of synthetics, Ian Holm, it was so memorable in Alien. And then the late Ian Holm, he's no longer with us. You bring him back to life. Tell us about incorporating him to the story, and also how were you able to use the and manipulate?
It was a whole journey, but we started. It was Ridley and I talking about this character at some point, because I knew I was going to build an animatronic. They were going to have a animatronic on a table, talking, looking at the people that was going to be on the set. Legacy Effects, which is all the people from Stan Winston, a lot of the Stan Winston's the disciples from back in the day. They're the best of the best. And they were in their 20s when they worked on Aliens and a lot of those movies back then. And now they're 60s and they're amazing. And we knew that Shane was going to build, that his team was going to be an animatronic. So when we were going to build an animatronic, it could be any face, really. So not going to be an actor. So we thought, like, what face could it be? And all this synthetic has come back over and over in different movies, across Alien. Like, Lance Henriksen played a few times. Michael Fassbender played a couple of times. So it's a recurrent idea that there's more than a model of each one of these. But the best one of it all, which I think is Ash from the first film, never made an appearance. So with Ridley and I, was like, that's the idea. We should try to pull that off. And we spoke with I personally called the state, his widow, and I pitched the idea to her. I would have never done it if they wouldn't have said yes. And she felt that Ian was kind of give the cold shoulder by Hollywood in the last 10 years of his life, and he would have loved to get the call to be involved in Alien. So she said yes, and we went away. We tried to hire, to kind of hide him as if he was alive as an actor, right? To spend the money as if we were hired him, basically. That was the idea. So, yeah, because a lot of people think, when you go this route, actor's going to be out of a job. Not really. I mean, it's way less expensive to hire one actor than to do what we did there, which is we hire Ian Holm in a way to hire his likeness, in a way to be able to use his likeness. Plus, there was an actor that did the dialogue, right? They had to do all the dialogue and the performance, plus the 50 people that it takes to wrangle. So job-wise, at least, it was not a problem. We hired a lot more people. It was way more expensive than hiring an actor. But it started there, animatronic, and then we depended on the shots. Some of the shots there that are full on the animatronic. Some others have some eye work. It's like CGI's work on it, and then in some of the shots, it had to be because of the lines were too complex on the lips, and you had to say more. So, but it was all this combination of all the best techniques available to kind of bring his likeness, back to life.
You mentioned that Ridley Scott was involved in the whole process of the film, but also I read that James Cameron was also advising you. Can you tell us about working with both Ridley Scott and James Cameron?
It was the best part of making this movie, I tell you. It was, for me at least, was the biggest privilege I ever had. Obviously Ridley was involved in every level because he's the producer of the film. But Cameron I just met through the years, and when this came about, I reached out, and he was kind enough to give me, a couple hours of his time to discuss the story and what we're doing, and discuss the science fiction of it all as well. Just some concept that we had for the planet. He was amazing at just helping me and my co-writer to guide us through the building of this. And a lot of it also was sharing his experience making Aliens back in the day. And then when I had a cut, Ridley was the first one to see it and give me his notes. And then, a few days later, Cameron was kind enough to watch it and give me his 2 cents on the cut, which in a way it was incredible because I wish you could have seen them. But if you compare Ridley's notes and Cameron notes to both of them watching exactly the same cut, they wouldn't repeat themselves at all. They wouldn't have a note in common. You know what I mean? Whatever Ridley thought might be an issue or something to look at or something to change, Cameron wouldn't even get into that. And vice versa. Whatever Cameron said, you should look at this, Ridley would, no, that's not I didn't compare, I didn't show, hey, Cameron says this or Ridley says that at all, but it was just something for me to enjoy, to see how 2 masters can watch exactly the same movie and have completely different opinions about what to improve, change, or what they liked, or what it's like. That's pretty good.
Which leads me to the next question, that how difficult was it for you to shoehorn this story between Alien and Aliens? I mean, it fits right in between.
It wasn't that difficult because in a way it's so standalone in a way, the story. At the end of the day, it's a survival story. It's like trying to kids to get over their head on the situation and just try to get out of there. So there was, obviously, it was more about, making sense of what does the company knows about the events of the first film. But at the end of the first film, as you remember, Sigourney records this log and says what happened. So I'm assuming by this, which is a few decades later, the company got the message and they know, what went down in the Nostromo. There was mostly about that. Well, the idea of let's take the original Xenomorph from the first movie. That's the opening scene, the rock and the remains of the Nostromo, and retrieving that. I thought made complete sense because if you rewatch that movie, the Xenomorphs get never really destroyed. He goes through the engine burst, but he doesn't get destroyed or dismembered. He just floats away gently. So I was like, well, I think he's going to be floating. It's still drifting a few years later. So I think that was the biggest challenge, was how are we gonna bring, we knew the seed of the story we wanted to be the original Xenomorph from the first film, which is the one that you see hanging there, crucified.
Right. And including the line, "Get away from you bitch. Get away from her, you bitch." Tell us about.
Very controversial, I would say.
Why was it controversial?
I don't know. You can ask the audience. I'm sure someone hates it here. They can tell you why. I think there was something of the controversy for some of the fans. It was like, why the fucking callbacks? Why does he have to say the line that Sigourney said is so iconic? And I agree that's the only. I mean, there's other lines that Ian Holmes said that he said in the other movie, but that's when it makes sense. It's the same model, so they just have one way to express certain ideas, right? So he doesn't say "Sorry, you're fucked." They go I can lie about your chances, but you have my sympathies. That's the way they say it. It's programmed that way. So that line is in the original film. He says it here again. So that I can defend more. I think the "Get away from her, you bitch." This is a story. It was not on the script. We had that scene. And, David Johnson, who plays Andy, falls on top of the Xenomorph, shoots it, kills it. He didn't say anything originally, and so I approached him, on set. And I was like, "Yeah, it feels like something's missing. You should say something, right?" And also being a movie that trying to be from the '80s, you want those classic, one-liners, and just been revoked for the ones that remember, but. There's lines like that, and it was like, you cannot beat that line from that movie. So I told him, "Well, you just try it with a little bit of a stutter." He was like, "Fuck no, don't make me say this." And I was like, just give it a go. We'll get one take and we'll try. So he goes and say, "Get away from her, you bitch," and also we was justified. We kind of justified in the story later. We actually add the reshoot. We reshoot one day, I think, for some technical stuff, and we got Bjorn to call him a bitch 2 times or 3 times in the movie to justify why he's using that word, right?
Correct.
So it didn't feel gratuitous. And then when we're gonna test the movie the first time, I mean, I gotta put it in the movie. I was like, I gotta try it. That's the purpose of testing a movie, to see if that works or not. Otherwise, I'll never know. We put it in the movie. We tested, when we got to Sacramento, and it's 600 people in the theater in Sacramento. And when that moment happens, the whole theater explodes in a cheer, right? Which is kind of the experience that I have every time I went to AMC at night and watched the movie. Every time that happens, the whole theater explodes. Which is, funny enough, it probably explodes around a few guys that are like, fuck this, why is he saying the line? But most people cheer. And at that point, it was like, there's no way I can take this out of the movie now.
Right.
Even me, I felt like, it's just too much. It's hard to justify. Why do you say the same line from Aliens? But all that explosion in the audience, which is really fucking hard to get, I tell you, for any movie, to get a random audience to suddenly explode in a cheer and stand up and start clapping, really hard to do, to have them so invested and so fired up by a moment. So it's like, there's no way. I can't take it out.
Well, the whole film feels like an homage to the earlier films and creating your own path. So I found it delicious to have that line included. I mean, your pain, it's done as an homage, correct?
Yeah, the whole film is, it's a whole love letter to all the aliens, like there's elements from Aliens, from the Jean-Pierre Jeunet, Alien Resurrection. There's elements from all of them. All those filmmakers, I have so much admiration for them. They are the filmmakers that shaped my career in a way, because they're the ones that influenced me the most, particularly at that time. So any nod I could do to them, once you get into nods in 1 and 2, my biggest nightmare is, imagine I am Fincher or I am Jean-Pierre Jeunet sitting watching the movie, waiting for my nod, and doesn't come because yours is not as good, So I made sure it's like I nod every one of them, because I had so much admiration for those filmmakers.
Last question, the score, we hear Jerry Goldsmith, we hear James Horner in it. That's intentional, correct? To have
there's some themes here and there from those. I mean, you have the trumpet from the themes from Alien are there. There's some of the anvil hits and some of the fanfares from Aliens as well, from Horner. There's even quotes to the theme from Prometheus. Again, same idea, just really nods and in a way that makes sense. There are themes that we hit here and there that require a theme, and you're not going to rewrite. You're not going to write a new theme for an idea that's part of Alien that has been written already by these masters, right? By all the best composers. I mean, the best composers in Hollywood work in these movies, like Horner and Goldsmith. It's incredible. So you're not going to try to do better there. I just got to do my version out of ego, out of like, but this is mine, and I gotta no. If you can quote them, you quote them. And actually, when we finish, we record this at Abbey Road, and on the day, the final day of recording, someone looked it up, and it was exactly the anniversary of the last day of recording on Aliens that James Horner and Cameron were at the same studio, in the same booth, in the same place, recording the soundtrack for Aliens. Those weird coincidences.
And then the continuation has been greenlit. You're going.
Well, not yet. I mean, we are super excited about the idea of seeing where this goes. We still have to, come up with a whole story. We have ideas of what we want to do, but I think with sequels, always the trick is to make sure you make them not because you can, not because this one did really well, but because we have a story that we're dying to tell. Right? This movie. I was dying to put this movie up and screen, because that's, as an Alien fan, this is what I wanted to see, right? This is the Alien movie I wanted to see. So the sequel is the same. We have to reach that point, but we're working on it and trying to find, what is the movie that everybody, that is worthy of your time. Right?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan, so I can't wait to see what you do next. And
thank you so much.
And thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.